Seattle started the day with its usual weather, light rain falling as if the sky just wanted to cry enough to annoy everyone. I stood by the floor to ceiling window on the 16th floor of BlueGrid Systems, watching the long streaks of water slide down the glass like an endless error chart. I am Maya Torres, 32, a systems analyst with 8 years of experience, still labeled a low level employee simply because I never made a scene or bragged about my accomplishments like everyone else. That week, everything seemed to hit me at once. The pipeline for our largest client stalled for 2 days, the API kept timing out, and logs were overwritten, erasing yesterday's data as if it never existed. I ran back and forth between dashboards, patching what I could, taking notes on what needed proper fixes, sighing at a piece of old code someone had patched hastily without leaving a note. Every night, I left the office after 10, while my direct manager, Evan Price, was still buzzing with excitement over slides full of optimization strategies he never actually tested himself. I knew I could not go on like this. Jenna Park, my colleague and my only real friend at the office, said something simple while we ate lunch by the broken coffee machine. You are doing the work of 3 people, but getting paid like one. You have to say something. Otherwise, they will keep treating you like free labor. That line echoed in my head all afternoon, and eventually, I decided to book a meeting with HR. I did not expect that meeting to become a turning point. I only wanted minimal recognition. A fair raise, even a simple thank you would have sufficed. Anything more than the silence I had endured for years. The HR office was on the 11th floor, always smelling like fresh printer paper mixed with cheap air freshener. Cynthia Hale sat behind her desk, a limited edition Starbucks cup in front of her. She peered at me through thin glasses, her gaze balancing between scrutinizing and awkwardly polite. I placed my raise proposal on her desk. I had spent a week compiling every system I fixed, every problem I solved. Cynthia flipped through a few pages like she was skimming a flyer, then pushed it back toward me. We do not negotiate with low level employees. Her voice was soft but sharp as broken glass. I barely opened my mouth before she stood up, grabbed her coffee, and walked toward the door. You should get back to work. Someone else has a slot right after you. I got up out of habit. Evan passed by in the hallway, saw me, but pretended to check his phone to avoid eye contact. I understood. Some people only want to be involved in trouble if they are the victims. I walked down the long hallway past the pantry where someone's soup spilled a hot aroma across the room, took the elevator, and stepped into the ground floor lobby. The front glass reflected my wet jacket. I looked nothing like someone creating value for a $100 million tech company. I looked like someone trying to convince herself that what she did mattered. I stood there for a few minutes, listening to the rain on the glass roof, feeling frustration and disbelief swirl together. I had spent my youth learning technology, becoming the person who solved problems everyone else avoided. Yet one sentence shrank all my effort down to 2 words: low level. I did not cry. I am not the type to cry over injustice. I just felt a new sensation growing in my chest, a strange calm, a chilling clarity. Like staring at a broken system, someone insists it is working fine. That night, I stood by the window of my small Capitol Hill apartment. Streetlights reflected through the rain, casting long streaks like the paths I had missed. I opened my personal laptop, untouched for 6 months. I logged into LinkedIn. The first notification popped up. Your profile was just viewed by North Cascade Retail. I chuckled softly, not because I was happy, but because it felt like someone had just cracked open another door in the darkness. All day, everything seemed closed in front of me, but that tiny notification was a reminder. I had underestimated myself for too long. Now I wanted to see what would happen if I walked through that door. I stared at that notification for a long time, as if it were challenging me to answer a question I had been avoiding. Anyone who has been underestimated might understand that feeling. A small moment, yet enough to realize you have been living in someone else's shadow for too long. If you are listening to this story and it feels familiar, tell me where you are tuning in from. I genuinely want to know how many people have stood before a closed door, wondering whether to knock again or turn away. And if you enjoy stories where the overlooked rise through intelligence, not noise, stick around. I promise the next part has even more to reveal. This is not a tale of blind revenge. It is a story about reclaiming the value others tried to hide from you. I did not respond to the LinkedIn notification that evening. I just left it there as a reminder that the world outside BlueGrid still existed. But the next morning, before heading into work, I opened my profile again. I looked at the headline that had not changed for years: Systems Analyst at BlueGrid Systems. It felt more like a celebration of my stagnation than a professional introduction. I adjusted a few lines in the job description, not exaggerating, not boasting. Just adding the things I actually did that had never been acknowledged: fixed pipelines, optimized APIs, analyzed data flows, and reduced downtime. These were things that should have been part of my official job description long ago. I did not send my CV anywhere. I just sat there, watching to see what would happen. 2 days later, an email appeared in my personal inbox, sent from North Cascade Retail. The subject line was short: regarding previous technical support. I opened it out of curiosity, not expecting much. Inside was a formal greeting, followed by a line that made me pause for a few seconds. They remembered me as the person who had resolved a serious billing error 8 months prior, the one BlueGrid had pushed back and forth between teams until I volunteered to take it on. They wanted to meet to ask a few more questions. No commitments, no pressure, just a meeting. But I knew meetings like that were rarely just meetings. I requested a day of PTO. Evan raised an eyebrow as if trying to appear concerned. Going to the dentist? His tone implied that wherever I went had to pass through him. I gave a polite reply: personal matters. He nodded without asking further, probably still thinking about this week's strategy presentation. North Cascade Retail was located in South Lake Union, one of the busiest neighborhoods in Seattle. Their building was bright, clean, with a sense of calm that did not feel as cold as BlueGrid. I entered with a visitor badge, feeling like I had stepped into another world. A receptionist led me to the conference room. The room was simple but refined, nothing excessive, and most importantly, it did not smell like microwave soup like the old pantry at my former office. The CTO, a man around 40 with a sharp yet friendly demeanor, shook my hand properly. The conversation started gently. They asked about BlueGrid's technical processes, how the support team operated, and a few details related to the billing incident last March. I answered sufficiently, without blaming anyone, without exaggeration. I just told the truth, exactly what I had seen and what a low-level analyst like me was allowed to know. But in their eyes, I could see they understood there were things left unsaid. After about 30 minutes, the CTO leaned forward. We have noticed multiple signs that BlueGrid's system is leaving significant gaps. We want to improve before the next internal audit. If you have a bit of free time, we would like to invite you for short-term consulting. The way he said it made the offer feel less like a request and more like an open opportunity. I agreed, not because I wanted to leave BlueGrid immediately, but because I wanted to know where the truth lay. I wanted to see whether my suspicions about BlueGrid's system over the past months were justified. That evening, after work, I stayed in my small apartment. A hot cup of tea on the table, laptop open, soft yellow light falling on the screen. North Cascade sent me a sample log and a few extracted files from their system to review. I did not expect anything remarkable. I just thought I would skim a few lines of code, a few standard error warnings. But as I dug deeper into the log events, something strange appeared. A sequence of requests from BlueGrid was marked as successful, but did not match the actual data. Part of the pipeline looked like it had experienced serious issues before, but instead of being fully addressed, it had been patched with temporary code, so temporary that just changing a minor configuration would collapse the system again. I remembered this type of patch clearly. I had seen it in an old ticket, the kind Evan said was not a priority, so I fixed it myself without ever reporting it. If I was not mistaken, BlueGrid had allowed this error to persist for months, concealing it by marking requests as successful. This was not merely careless, it was deliberate. I leaned back in my chair, watching the laptop screen blink through each line of log. A chill ran down my spine. I understood this was not a small matter. A large system like North Cascade could not operate on temporary code. If the truth came out, BlueGrid would not face just a routine audit, but potentially serious financial consequences. Around 11 at night, I sent a preliminary report to North Cascades CTO. Not a conclusion, just my observations and questions that needed clarification. I was not trying to make BlueGrid look bad. I just presented the data objectively enough for them to understand that the issue required attention. 3 hours later, as I was about to shut down and sleep, my phone buzzed with a new email. North Cascade had replied in the middle of the night. They thanked me, and then one line made me freeze for several seconds. We would like to discuss further collaboration with you. This was no longer temporary consulting. It was an invitation to open a new chapter. And as I read that professional yet cold line, I understood that my career trajectory had begun to shift. No noise, no fireworks, just a midnight email. Yet sometimes the biggest changes enter your life quietly like that. I returned to BlueGrid on Monday morning with a completely different mindset. It felt like walking through an old house I once knew every crack of, but now every corner seemed ready to collapse. Everything was the same. The coffee machine still leaked, the overhead lights in the data analysis area still flickered, and Evan was still standing in the middle of the room, reading aloud something about next quarter's vision that no one cared about. As I sat at my desk before I could open my email, Evan waved as if calling an intern. Maya, I need you to prepare a new dashboard for the executive presentation. He handed me a stack of color-printed papers. I looked at them and immediately recognized the numbers I had analyzed just last week, now adorned with a few extra charts that Evan wanted redone so his boss could understand them more easily. Jenna at the desk across the way looked at me, then at the papers in my hands. Let me guess, slides for the boss again. Her voice was soft, but enough to make me smile. Jenna was always the only one who understood the absurdity of how BlueGrid distributed work. Skilled technical people like me had to do the presentation work for managers, while people like Evan only had to speak a few words about vision to consider their task complete. I did not feel as angry as before. No more sense of insult, no more heavy disappointment. What I felt was distance. I was here, but as if I no longer belonged. I made the dashboard quickly, adding no extra analysis, no self-improvement like before. I did only what was assigned and sent it back to Evan. He nodded, without a thank you, then ran off to boast about his own accomplishment. That evening, I opened my personal laptop and logged into North Cascades' consulting system. Unlike BlueGrid, where every task had to pass through 5 approval levels, North Cascades sent a clear request and respected my time. We need to review the requests from BlueGrid over the past 3 months. Please note any anomalies. Just a simple sentence, but it made me feel recognized for my abilities. I opened the additional logs they sent, the lines of symbols running quickly across the screen like untold stories. As I leaned back in my chair, I noticed something strange. In the authentication system, an access token was used from an IP address not on the approved list. Worse, the token belonged to a BlueGrid technical account, the kind with deep access to the infrastructure. I double-checked to make sure I was not mistaken. But it was all clear. The token had been activated late at night, during the time BlueGrid announced system maintenance. The request was marked successful, but some parameters suggested the token may have been held in a black box before returning results. In other words, the token might have been exposed during operation. I sent a preliminary report and requested a meeting for further clarification. The next morning, when I arrived at North Cascade to hand over in person, the CTO called me into an unexpected meeting. I entered a room with 8 people, all heads of key departments. They looked at me not with suspicion, but with anticipation. The CTO gestured for me to sit and opened his laptop. She was the only person in the past 2 years to detect the anomaly in this authentication system. We suspect that some of our data may have been accessed improperly. He spoke slowly, each word dropping onto the table. A chill ran from my neck down my spine. If what he said was true, BlueGrid had not only erred, but concealed a major security violation. The department heads began discussing, not loudly, but intensely. One asked me to assess the risk level. Another asked if it was possible that the error originated from North Cascade's system. I answered each question clearly. I did not claim that BlueGrid intentionally hid anything. I only presented the technical signs as objectively as possible, but in that room, everyone understood. What I had found was not minor. At the end of the meeting, the CTO looked at me and said something that made my heart slow. We want to prepare a full audit of BlueGrid, and we want you to lead it. The room was silent for a few seconds before all eyes turned to me. I understood the meaning of that offer. If I accepted, I would be at the forefront of an audit that could shake an entire company. But I also understood the accompanying pressure. I had worked at BlueGrid, fixed their errors, and been undervalued there. I had to remain objective, follow legal protocols, work fast, and execute perfectly. I took a deep breath and asked the only question I needed answered. If I agree, will I have full access and the necessary support? The CTO nodded immediately. Completely. We want the truth. As I stood to leave, he added one more sentence. Maya, we want to offer you the position of lead external auditor on this project. If you agree, we will send the official offer today. I left the meeting with the feeling that the world was spinning slowly. Part of me was excited, part cautious. But deep down, I knew this moment was the turning point I had waited for so long. Talented people who are undervalued will eventually be seen for their true worth, and it seemed that my day had finally come. I received the official offer from North Cascade 3 days after the meeting. The email arrived in my personal inbox near noon, while I was still sitting in front of my BlueGrid laptop with a cold cup of coffee. The salary listed was double what I was currently earning. Along with it were benefits, equipment budget, training support, and a final line that made me read it twice. Full access to the necessary data for the audit, with no limits within the contract scope. I stared at the offer for a long time, not because I hesitated, but because it felt like something inside me was slowly closing. 8 years of working hard at BlueGrid, 8 years being undervalued, 8 years trying to prove my worth. Now another place recognized that value instantly. But I did not sign. I did not want to leave hastily or without calculation. I wanted to leave on the right day, at the right time, under the right circumstances. Partly for legal reasons, partly because I wanted to depart in a way they would remember. That afternoon, Jenna came by my desk. She leaned over as if asking a quiet question. Take care of yourself, she said. Cynthia has been asking around about you. I frowned. Asking what? Jenna rolled her eyes, like, whether you are looking for a job, meeting anyone, that kind of indirect question. I knew that style. Cynthia never asked directly. She always found a roundabout way to maintain control. I just nodded, thanked Jenna, and continued working. But a sense of caution rose inside me. Even now, they still wanted to control me. That evening, I began gathering reference documents I knew I would need for the audit. Not BlueGrid internal documents, not anything that could violate an NDA. I collected what belonged to me: personal notes, technical descriptions I had written for the tasks I had handled, and guide files I created for clients, all stored in a separate folder, clearly structured in case any questions arose later. As I was organizing some files on my personal laptop, I received an email from an unknown address. No sender name, just a string of meaningless characters. Normally, I would have ignored it, but the subject line made me click. Keep this. Inside was an attached log file and a few short words. I did not know who sent it, but based on the file structure, I immediately knew it came from inside BlueGrid. This was not the usual shared log. This was the original version of an incident report I remembered very clearly. It had disappeared from the shared system 4 months ago. At the time, Evan told me the report was moved to another archive at the request of senior management. But when I opened this file, every line of data seemed to expose the truth. The report showed that BlueGrid had recorded a high-level security violation. An admin access token had been used from a strange IP, matching what I had found at North Cascade. Worse, the timestamp in the report had been altered. From a night at 2 a.m., it was changed to normal working hours, a crude but effective cover-up if no one dug deeper. I leaned back in my chair, feeling my heart beating faster than usual. Not from surprise, but because a critical piece had fallen into place. I did not know who sent the file, but I understood why. Inside BlueGrid, there were still people who saw the problem but could not speak up. I was the only one capable of bringing the truth to light. The next morning, as I packed a few personal items into a small bag, Evan appeared behind me. He tapped lightly on the edge of the desk, trying to appear friendly. Maya, You look busy these days. I knew that tone, the voice of someone trying to extract information without revealing intent. I smiled lightly, giving a casual reply. Just normal, I said. Evan glanced at my bag. Cleaning up your desk or changing jobs? His tone was half joking, half serious, but I could hear the vague worry. I just answered. Cleaning up, my desk was a bit messy. He smiled, but his eyes did not. Then he left, but I knew he would return with more questions if he had the chance. That afternoon, I opened the HR portal and submitted my resignation. The process was so simple that it made me laugh. Just a few tick boxes and a confirmation line. No one asked why. No one requested a meeting. BlueGrid had never cared, so it was no surprise they did not care this time. An hour later, I received an email from Cynthia. Here is the handover document for a low-level employee leaving the company. Thank you for your contribution. The attachment was a PDF. I opened it. The file was corrupted. Not a single line was readable. The irony of fate, perfectly executed. I packed the last of my things, a broken pencil, an old notebook, and a photo I had taken of Seattle in winter from the office window. Nothing memorable here, nothing worth keeping. That evening, I sent a final email to the team. Short, polite, without extra emotion. Thank you all for your support. Good luck with your future projects. I closed the laptop. The click of the lid echoed softly in the silent room. I looked at the black screen in front of me, feeling a quiet sense of relief. Done. The day I submitted my resignation was also the day I began disappearing from BlueGrid in the literal sense. No one asked me to attend a farewell meeting, no last lunch invitation, no polite parting words. Everything passed quietly, as if I had never existed there. I thought I would feel upset, but instead I felt relieved. From the moment the resignation was updated in the internal system, I became a sort of ghost employee. I still had to work the final 2 weeks according to policy, but no one paid attention to what I did. I joined meetings with my camera off, letting the mic show a connection error. I said the bare minimum in morning syncs, just enough so no one could complain. When asked to hand over work, I delivered exactly what was required. Minimum documents, clear, legal. No extra notes, no long explanations, no effort to cover their gaps anymore. Ironically, my lack of presence caused BlueGrid more confusion than they expected. Just 3 days after submitting my resignation, Slack messages began popping up, searching for documents I had managed. Is there a visualization file from last month? Who has the latest update on the billing pipeline? Has anyone seen notes explaining the API mapping structure? Each question echoed toward me, but I did not answer. Everything had been handed over according to regulations. They just did not know how to use it or understand how it worked. One evening, as I sat in my quiet apartment preparing for the new job, a junior analyst messaged me on a personal account. Maya, have you heard? I'm not sure, but they say the company is about to be audited. Just asking lightly, everyone's scared. I read the message and smiled slightly. Not a mocking smile, just a strange feeling. When I was still there, no one listened to me. Now they were asking me about the future of their own company. I replied neutrally, do your part well. Everything will become clear. The junior thanked me and went silent. Probably just needed some reassurance. My first day at North Cascade came earlier than I expected. I wore a dark gray blazer, adjusted my hair in the mirror, and stepped out the door. Unlike the tension of an interview, that morning I felt unusually calm. Perhaps because I knew I was entering a place that needed me, in the truest sense. When I arrived at the building, the receptionist handed me a small envelope and smiled. Welcome to North Cascade, Maya. Inside the envelope was my new badge. The bold letters made me look twice. Lead Systems Auditor, Phase 0. The feeling was not pride, but finally being in the position I should have occupied long ago. The CTO waited for me in the 12th floor hallway. He shook my hand firmly, unassuming but fully cordial. Welcome officially. We have a lot to do. He led me to the large conference room where the technical team was waiting. About 20 people in the room, including the product manager, head of security, and specialized engineers. As I stepped in, the CTO introduced me with a brief line that made everyone turn to look. She knows BlueGrid's system better than they know themselves, not a grandiose compliment. He stated it as an objective fact, which made my role very clear. All eyes in the room shifted from curiosity to focus. They did not undervalue me like at BlueGrid. They looked at me as the key they had been waiting for. The onboarding did not take long. They introduced reporting processes, internal tools, and the access I was granted. Logging into the new audit system, a massive data network opened before my eyes. All logs from the past 3 years, all tickets related to BlueGrid, internal reports, and even requests suspected of mishandling. I had full access to read and categorize everything. As I familiarized myself with the system, I felt a familiar yet entirely new sensation. I was still the person sitting in front of a command line screen, analyzing each status code, each processing loop. But unlike BlueGrid, where everyone wanted to hide things or push responsibility, here each piece of data was treated seriously. And I was fully trusted. At the end of the morning, the CTO came over. Next week, we will start the audit at BlueGrid. You will lead it. I nodded, saying nothing further, but my heart was anything but calm. In the afternoon, I stayed at the office longer than necessary to review documents. As I stood to leave, I looked at the badge on my blazer under the hallway lights. Lead Systems Auditor. Part of me felt relieved, the rest hardened like steel. Tomorrow, I will begin preparing for my first assignment with North Cascade, and in just a few weeks, I would return to BlueGrid. Not as a low-level employee, not as someone they could underestimate. I would return with entirely new authority, and this time, they would have to listen. I arrived at BlueGrid on Monday morning the following week. Seattle was gray, like a curtain before the main stage lights turn on. Unlike the last time I walked out of the building in silence, this time I entered through the front doors, wearing my North Cascade visitor badge on my chest. Each step was deliberate, neither fast nor slow, as if I were entering a place I once knew intimately, now only a backdrop of my past life. When I appeared in the 16th floor work area, the room nearly froze. The clatter of keyboards diminished, and a few swivel chairs paused mid-turn. I felt the wide, confused, almost fearful eyes of my former colleagues. Some tried to appear calm, but their hands hovered over the keyboards. Evan was the first to notice me. He was standing by someone's desk holding a colorful printout, still talking about an improvement plan. Seeing me, he froze mid-sentence. Maya? His voice seemed strangled. His face went pale. He had never been good at hiding emotions, especially fear. I just nodded in place of a greeting. Amid the whispering, I saw Cynthia step out from the small meeting room. She looked as if she were preparing for an important meeting, carrying a folder and a hot coffee. Her eyes scanned me with surprise, then paused on the badge I was wearing. I knew the exact moment she read the words because her face twitched slightly, like a tension had been pulled too tight. Lead External Auditor. Cynthia swallowed softly, almost choking. Not out of joy at seeing me again, but because she understood what that role meant. Audits are the thing HR and management hate most. Customer audits are even worse. An audit led by me would be a nightmare. The first audit meeting was held in the large conference room. As I entered, I saw Cynthia sitting with two people from legal, and Evan placing his laptop on the table, trying to appear composed. No one invited me to sit, but I pulled the chair at the head of the table and set down my laptop without hesitation. Cynthia spoke first. We are glad to support North Cascade. However, to ensure security, we will manage log access and only provide the necessary portions. The words sounded reasonable, but in reality, it was an attempt to block the path. Cynthia wanted to retain control of information, limit the scope of investigation, and make things more difficult. As soon as Cynthia finished, legal simultaneously sent an email to everyone in the room. The message requested that the audit be limited to the last 2 months. The way it was written almost made me laugh. The last 2 months were the period BlueGrid had cleaned the surface the most. Everyone knew the real issues were in older data. Evan spoke next, trying to appear more cooperative, but I could see the defensiveness. Maya used to work here. Surely she understands. She might have biases, so I think management should supervise to ensure objectivity. I looked at him for a long moment. Bias, coming from the person who had pushed responsibility onto me countless times. I opened my laptop, turned the screen toward them. The North Cascade audit contract signed with BlueGrid displayed all terms. I pointed to Section 9.3. According to this clause, the audit party has the right to access all relevant data for the past 12 months, including system logs, error handling tickets, and any related documents. This is a legal right that the company agreed to from the start. Cynthia looked down at the page, flipping frantically as if trying to find a point to argue. Evan remained silent. The legal team frowned, seemingly surprised I knew the document so well. I continued. Here is an email from North Cascade's CTO confirming the expanded scope of the investigation. Not a suggestion, a requirement. The room fell into heavy silence. I could see the tension on every face, as if they were holding a dam that had already begun to leak. While everyone was distracted, Jenna passed by the conference room. She glanced in, recognized me, then stepped inside with an expression only I could read. She handed me a small, folded piece of paper. I took it, and Jenna smiled as if nothing had happened. I left it on my desk, she said before leaving, still casual. I unfolded the paper under the table. It was a secondary access key for the old internal system, something only veteran employees knew existed. A pathway to logs Cynthia and Evan never wanted me to see. I looked up, catching Jenna's eye through the glass. She blinked once and walked on. The meeting ended in a strange atmosphere. They no longer opposed me, but they did not fully cooperate either. All of them seemed to be standing on the edge, trying to maintain balance. As everyone left the room, I slowly packed my laptop and walked toward the server room. The metal door opened as I scanned the temporary visitor badge. Inside, the familiar dim blue light glowed, the servers humming like the heartbeat of the building. I had been here hundreds of times as a BlueGrid employee, but today everything was different. No pressure, worrying about blame, no contempt from management. I stepped in, standing among the servers as if suspended between past and present. The blinking blue lights on either side seemed to welcome me back. But this time, I was no longer someone they underestimated. I am leading the audit, and they have nowhere left to hide. When the server room door closed behind me, I took a deep breath. The cold air from the server room's conditioning brushed against my skin like a reminder. Every piece of data I had ever touched, every fix I had applied in late nights, was all still here. But this time, I was not here to save their system. I was here to expose everything they had deliberately hidden. I opened my laptop and connected to the system with the access rights granted by North Cascade. The secondary key Jenna had given me let me dive into folders Cynthia would never want me to see. Old logs, backups, and files are no longer linked in the new system. All of it is like hidden currents that only someone who has worked here long enough would know how to trace. Within the first hour, I saw the first thing that made my blood run cold. Shared credentials, not just one, over a dozen. Admin accounts are used by multiple people, unnoted, uncontrolled, and not following any security standards. I scrolled down the list and saw an account belonging to someone who had left 8 months ago still active. Not locked, not disabled. Next, hard-coded API keys. I had warned about this long ago, that embedding a key into code was leaving a backdoor open for anyone patient enough to find it, but BlueGrid had not fixed it. They had only patched it with a comment beside it, fix later. The file had been updated 5 times. The comment remained. Then came one of the things that almost made me laugh at the sheer chaos. An Excel file in the shared folder named Real Use This V6. I opened it and immediately understood why BlueGrid's clients often complained about inconsistent credentials. This Excel file contained access accounts for multiple vendors, handwritten, unencrypted. Many rows had been deleted and overwritten, and others had joking notes from someone. And all of it was in a public access folder. I almost didn't need to look further, but I continued auditing. The full backup from the past week remained unencrypted, completely exposed. One click would allow anyone to download it entirely. I remembered proposing automatic encryption policies, which had been rejected as too time-consuming to set up. Now, the cost of that laziness was clearer than ever. That afternoon, I entered the conference room to present my first findings. Cynthia, Evan, Someone from legal and the VP of engineering were all present. The atmosphere was taut, like a string pulled to its limit. They no longer showed contempt. They were afraid. Fear made them react differently. Cynthia remained cold. Legal caution. The VP tried to negotiate. Evan's defensiveness was obvious. I presented each item, projecting clear, specific documents. No exaggeration, no emotion, only data. When I opened Real Use This V6 on the big screen, a few sharp intakes of breath echoed through the room. The previous intern had edited a few cells, leaving silly notes. I zoomed in on the bottom right corner, showing the last editor's name. Evan's face stiffened. If this got out, they would be judged negligent in managing access accounts. Evan immediately countered, "You are not allowed to view that file. It has been altered for a long time. It's just a temporary internal file, worthless for the audit." I did not respond immediately. I closed the file, opened another folder, and found the log the anonymous senior engineer had sent me before I left. I projected it on the screen. Good, because this is the original. They forgot to delete. The room fell into a heavy silence. The log clearly showed that the timestamp had been altered. The editor was a mid-level manager from Evan's team. Altering the timestamp was a direct violation of the data retention rules in the North Cascade contract. Cynthia clicked her lips nervously. The VP straightened in his chair. Legal began speaking quickly, trying to argue that it could be a system error, that an old log alone could not be used as evidence. I let them finish, then spoke evenly. I drew no conclusions. I only presented the data, and if further verification was needed, I could request the log from North Cascade for comparison. That statement froze the room. Everyone understood that North Cascade's log could not be altered at BlueGrid's whim. An objective truth. The VP tried to change tactics. We can negotiate. Not everything needs to be included in the main report. We could prioritize fixes now and add later. I stared at him for a long moment. That suggestion sounded no different than a plea to hide. I shook my head. No mitigation. No fix now, report later. No negotiation. The meeting ended in complete gloom. Cynthia looked at me as if I had just collapsed the entire floor. Legal packed up papers, pale-faced. Evan said nothing, just left quickly. That very evening, while reviewing reports at North Cascade, an email from their CFO lit up my screen. Its content was brief. Based on the risk level and violations detected, North Cascade has decided to freeze all payments to BlueGrid until the audit is complete. I read the line 3 times, not out of surprise, but because I knew. From this moment on, BlueGrid would truly shake, and this is only the beginning. The morning after North Cascade announced the payment freeze, I received a flood of updates from those still at BlueGrid. Without anyone speaking, I could picture the chaos unfolding. But when Jenna sent me a Slack screenshot from the leadership channel, I saw just how vivid it was. The leadership channel, normally quiet except for a few morning greetings, was on fire. Messages scrolled like a flood. The most urgent questions revolved around North Cascade freezing payments, then a slew of shocking inquiries. Who approved the timestamps? Who was responsible for shared credentials? Why were backup systems still unencrypted? These questions were sent amid tense debates, interspersed with subtle accusations. A director I had met only twice in 8 years suddenly posted a notice of immediate resignation. No explanation, no goodbye. The remaining staff tried to stay calm, but the more they tried, the more their panic showed. Evan was no exception. Just a few hours later, he posted a long note on LinkedIn, speaking about new journeys, growth, and future vision. A paragraph full of grandiose words, but anyone who had worked with him knew it was a disguise for a quick exit. I had never seen him react so fast to anything related to the company. While BlueGrid was in turmoil, I received not one, but several messages from lower-level employees, people who rarely spoke to me before, now reaching out anxiously. They asked if I knew what was happening. Should they look for other jobs? Should they request team transfers? Some asked directly if I could assist them later. I wrote nothing specific. I reassured them as neutrally as possible. I did not want them to panic. But I also could not lie that the company was stable. Looking at these messages, I realized something. Most of the people reaching out were diligent, undervalued employees, just like I had once been. They deserved better opportunities. That evening, I opened the personnel list in North Cascade's internal system. The CTO had assigned me to build a new department responsible for audit, compliance, and technical handover. I needed to recruit people, and I knew exactly where to start. I created a list of potential candidates, filling in the names of BlueGrid employees I trusted to have true capability. People who had been overlooked, sidelined, and assigned meaningless tasks, while they could do much more. Each name entered carefully, a silent pledge that I would not let them endure what I once had. As I was completing the list, an email from BlueGrid appeared unexpectedly. The subject was politely phrased: short-term consulting proposal. The content stated they were struggling to stabilize the system post-audit and wanted me to participate as an independent consultant. Of course, they did not mention that they had once considered me unworthy of negotiation. I read the email slowly, then replied within 30 seconds. My rate was 5 times my old salary. Payment up front, 1 week. No negotiation. I sent it and turned off the screen. 2 hours later, they replied, saying they would review and respond soon. I knew how desperate they were. The next day, Jenna called me. Not a message. She called directly. Her voice was calm, but I heard the restraint in every word. I submitted my resignation. Can you recommend me to North Cascade? I did not ask why. I knew. Jenna had witnessed the chaos from the inside all week. I told her to send her CV and promised to forward it directly to the CTO. But BlueGrid had not given up. They sent an audit rebuttal to North Cascade. The document looked professional, full of charts and analysis, but I only needed a few minutes to spot the issues. Timestamps in the report had been altered. Some data was slightly adjusted, as if trying to conceal the truth, but not sophisticated enough. During the meeting with North Cascade, the CTO had me analyze the report. I opened my screen, comparing each timestamp with the log the anonymous senior engineer had sent me before I left. A few seconds were enough to point out the differences. The timestamps were altered, metadata modified, and the log chain truncated in access control. I explained clearly, calmly, and objectively. No embellishment, no interpretation. The data spoke for itself. Looking at the laptop screen, I saw the CTO press his lips together. The CFO tapped the desk twice lightly, a reflex of someone who had long suspected this and now had confirmation. That afternoon, as I was preparing to leave the office, I received the final email. The subject was simple but heavy enough to change everything. Termination of contract with BlueGrid Systems. No euphemisms, no explanation needed. North Cascade hoped to continue working with my new audit department to rebuild their internal processes. I stood silently for a few seconds in front of the screen, not out of surprise, but because I understood. The domino effect had begun, and BlueGrid, whether they liked it or not, was caught in the chain of its own mistakes. The game had entered a new chapter. When North Cascade officially terminated the contract with BlueGrid, things moved faster than I expected. Just 2 weeks later, the new department was established. Its name was long and cold-sounding, but carried undeniable weight: Systems Integrity and Oversight Department. I was appointed director. This was not a symbolic position. It was a real leadership seat, with budget, personnel, and decision-making authority. On my first morning in the new office, I stood before the large glass window looking down at Seattle. The sky was unusually clear. Sunlight broke through the gray clouds, casting soft light across the buildings. Part of me felt strange. For 8 years, I had worked in BlueGrid's shadows, always the fixer, never recognized. Now I stood in a private office with a real leather chair and a neat nameplate displaying my new role. The first departmental meeting was held in the largest conference room on the 12th floor. This was the same room North Cascade had used to meet with BlueGrid for important sessions. I had walked in before as a low-level employee, summoned to explain a few technical mistakes. Today, I walked in as the lead. As I opened the door, the first people I saw made me smile slightly. Three familiar faces from BlueGrid. Skilled individuals are buried in secondary roles, labeled as inexperienced despite doing far more than their titles suggest. The junior analyst who had once asked if she should leave was sitting on the right, laptop in hand. A back-end engineer previously excluded from major meetings by Evan was there too, her confidence evident for the first time. And Jenna, my quiet anchor through all these years, sat to the left, an indispensable part of this journey. I walked to the conference table. The CTO stood, greeting me, then looked around the room. He spoke a simple sentence, yet heavy with meaning. Everyone here today is present because Maya trusts you and because we trust Maya. Let's start fresh, without hiding, without repeating BlueGrid's mistakes. The room nodded. No one spoke unnecessarily. The atmosphere felt like writing a new chapter, clean, solid, foundational. After the introduction, I got down to business. On the table lay a stack of thick documents my team had compiled over the past week. On top was a separate file, printed on heavier paper than usual. I placed my hand on it, recalling North Cascade leadership's instructions. Finalize the last steps regarding BlueGrid, complete the contract termination, and document all technical failings for handover. Just as I was about to start the presentation, the door opened. A receptionist stepped in, followed by Cynthia Hale. Watching her enter, time seemed to fold back on itself. Cynthia no longer carried her previous queen-like demeanor. The air around her lacked the forced authority scent. Instead, she appeared cautious, careful, and slightly weary. I pointed to the chair opposite. Please, sit. Cynthia tried to maintain composure as she sat, but I could see her hands tremble slightly. She was now in a place she had never imagined facing before. Not an HR office, not the hallway where she once walked me out with a condescending smile. Here, I held the power to decide, and she had to listen. I opened the file in front of me, flipped to the correct page, and pushed it toward Cynthia. The bold title on the first page was clear: Termination Recommendations, Compliance Failures. Cynthia looked down, lips moving subtly. She read the first few lines, then raised her eyes to me. That look no longer carried contempt, no longer conveyed condescension. Only awareness that every word she had ever said to me was now coming full circle. I did not speak loudly, but each word I said was sharp as a thin blade. You told me once that you do not negotiate with low-level employees. I paused to ensure she heard and understood the full meaning. But today, I am no longer low-level. No one in the room moved. Jenna looked at me, her eyes slightly glistening. The CTO sat upright, acknowledging this moment as part of the company's important history. Cynthia glanced down at the document again, offering no rebuttal, no excuse. She knew any explanation now was meaningless. We completed the session in 30 minutes. Cynthia left the conference room without saying anything further. She walked slowly, shoulders stiff, as if holding on to her last shred of dignity. When the door closed, no one spoke. Everything was clear. One chapter had ended, another had begun. I stepped out of the conference room after the long session. As the large door opened, sunlight from the hallway greeted me with rare Seattle rays. The sky was unusually clear, as if the city itself was exhaling after a long storm. I paused for a few seconds, looked at the sky, and told myself, corporate drama never truly ends. But this time, I am at the helm, and I am ready.